So I really look forward to being educated. So the first probably order of the day is the welcome remarks by Miss Lam, and I believe that she has left us a recorded message. If we can play that recorded message, please. Maybe if we can play that recorded message. That's okay. That's okay. I can request on behalf of FNF. We have Miss Anika here with us, and of course I can request her for her opening remarks, please. Thank you.
Thank you so much. The idea behind the GSP Plus was that back when this year started, we realized that because we are a German political foundation, by the way, founded in Germany in 1958, we've been working towards a prosperous and peaceful Pakistan since 1986. And we believe that one of the core areas that we work on is a social market economy, and trade liberalization, opening our borders to other countries, is essential and necessary given today's day and age. So with regards to that, and also being a political foundation from a European country, we thought that the GSP Plus was an essential tool for Pakistan, not just because it is going to facilitate the economy and going to facilitate economic and social mobility of the people who do engage in trade, but the GSP Plus has a lot of contingencies associated with human rights, with social and social value structures, in the sense that, you know, they keep track of environment and political situation, freedom of speech, things of the sort. So back in, I think, early March, Sarah, that was when we started working on it, right? Eventually in July, when we were able to present this paper, luckily, to the EU delegation who was visiting Pakistan during the time period, we were able to get really valuable feedback, not just from them, but also from relevant stakeholders who joined us at the time. And then this report was sort of revised in light of both sides. So I think this is what is unique about this paper, that it does not present one side, which is just thorough research and studying our external climate, but it also sort of takes into the dialogue that went into generating this research. And I think one of the key takeaways from that presentation in July was the fact that Pakistan, the earlier we enter into the negotiation state with the GSP Plus or the EU delegation, the more space we will have for negotiations. Unfortunately, over the past few months, the political situation particularly has not been very conducive. And to anybody on the external or on the outside, it might seem like things are in a tumble dry, I'd say, and, you know, they're constantly moving and there's a lot of upheaval. But the earlier we enter into the negotiation space, the more leverage we would have to sort of explain our side and also mutually decide. The next GSP will be granted for another 10 years. And I think it's a significant it is of significant importance to Pakistan, its economy, and also to the social political environment that ensues with regards to whenever GSP Plus is granted to us. So I think I'll now leave you guys open to sort of, the paper is available. Anybody who's interested, it's available on our website. You can also drop us a request. So in case you want to study and see what the current state was, how well it was utilized, we believe that there's still more space for utilization of this scheme, and that we still need to take more advantage of the program in place. So today as well, we're going to talk about how to leverage that and how to utilize the scheme and hope that it's granted to us for the next 10 years. Thank you.
Thank you, Anika. I really appreciate these inputs. It's heartening to see the interest in this session. So if I can just request the hall in charge to please arrange some more chairs, because I can see people standing at the back, you know. So yes, thank you. Thank you. With this, let's move to our trigger presentation. And I have the honor of inviting Ms. Sara Kazmi for her presentation, please. It's up to you entirely. I'm sorry. I'll have to. Sorry, I beg your pardon.
Yeah, sure.
The video is ready probably, so we can take the video first. Thanks.
On behalf of Friedrich Naumann Foundation for Freedom Pakistan office, I would like to welcome you to the joint panel discussion on the development of GSP Plus, which is an economic mechanism that the European Union offers to selected countries like Pakistan to facilitate international trade with the European Union. And the special part about this scheme is that it is conditioned to the implementation of various international agreements. Now, Pakistan has signed a lot of international agreements, and the issue is how are these framework agreements implemented? And for Pakistan, this is a crucial issue given the current situation with the natural catastrophes like the floods and the heat wave that the country is still recovering from. We have just gone through the pandemic, and at the same time, we all know about the difficult economic situation of the country and the high inflation, which really hurts everybody here in the country. And Friedrich Naumann Foundation for Freedom, which has been active in Pakistan since 1986, has as one of its core themes the facilitation of an economic friendly environment within governance, but also in the society as a whole. So this issue of trade relations with the European Union for us is a very important topic. And we were very grateful that our partner institute Prime, and namely Ms. Sarah Javed, who works as a researcher at Prime Institute, has taken upon the task to actually assess the current state of affairs and how Pakistan has been able to benefit from this GSP Plus scheme. And for Pakistan, this is actually not only for Pakistan, also for the European Union at a very important point in time, because the current GSP Plus scheme will end next year. And in June, a reporting delegation, a monitoring delegation from the European Union came to visit Pakistan and have talks with decision makers of politics, civil society, and also, of course, with business leaders in order to assess how this whole scheme has actually been, let's say, executed, and how the final beneficiaries were actually able to make use of this mechanism. And the final report about this period will be crucial and detrimental for the European Union, namely the European Parliament, to decide upon whether Pakistan will be invited to continue with a new GSP Plus scheme, which would be offered from 2024 up to 2034. So this comes at a very crucial point in time. And with our publication, we have hoped to actually contribute to this discussion. And we will also want to take this discussion forward. And this is why I'm so grateful that SDPI has taken on this issue. And also, we are very grateful and very interested in having your discussion and taking that discussion and your points of view further in that discussion, because the development of the new GSP Plus scheme from 2024 onwards will be decided in the months to come. So whatever we will discuss here also at this conference, we hope to bring it forward and take it together with the colleagues of our Brussels office to the debating tables in the European Union as well. And of course, we hope that Pakistan will be invited to the next GSP Plus scheme and will be able to make even better use of the new scheme, because Pakistan has been a beneficiary, but as we will discuss and as our study shows, there's still a lot of room for improvement, and Pakistan has not managed to really make use of the scheme 100%. And I think there's still a lot of potential to facilitate trade between our two regions. So I wish you all a good discussion. I hope that your results and your thoughts will help us to bring that discussion forward and hopefully come out with a very beneficial scheme for Pakistan and the European Union. Thank you.
Thank you. And Sarah, over to you. Thank you.
So thank you very much, Dr. Bakar. Thank you, STPI. Thank you, Frederick Naumann Foundation, for inviting me and for welcoming my opinion and my comments on this very pertinent, very important issue, that is trade, competitiveness, and GSP plus. When we talk about GSP plus itself has become a case study, especially in terms of when we talk about the South Asian economies. The 64% of Pakistan's total exports, they're going towards a few destinations, including European Union, UK, and the US. And then we see that 61% of the Pakistan's total exports are textiles. And out of that 61%, 74% are again going to these three destinations. So when I talk about trade, and I really need to be very much careful, because especially when Gonzalo Varela is in the room, those who follow his work know what I'm talking about. So I'm very honored, sir. I will just give my opinion and my 2 cents on the topic. And I believe that my honorable panelists, Dr. Bakar, PSW itself has been a success story, Mr. Daniel, and my other fellow panelists are going to add to that. So just giving a brief introduction, my name is Sarah Javed, and I've done my master's in economics from LUMS. Pakistan and the European Union under GSP Plus, I did this policy paper in partnership with Frederick Naumann Foundation while working at Prime with Ali Salman. Currently, I'm working as a social sectors associate with the consultancy associates in development. So just coming up to the main part, Pakistan and the European Union under GSP Plus, it provides an update and analysis of the European Union's GSP Plus status, while also reviewing the current trade outlook of Pakistan with the rest of the world. Next. So considering the short time frame, I'll start off with methodology, few policy foundation findings, and then Pakistan and the European Union, how they're performing under GSP plus status. What happens if Pakistan loses this status, followed by a few policy recommendations. Next, please. Next, please. To the main part, to the data slide. Yes. So for the purpose, I've extracted data, trade data from the State Bank Pakistan's website, and for beneficiary details and the European Union's overall trade outlook, I've extracted data from the European Commission's official website. Please next. So the analysis disaggregates for this specific report Pakistan's trade into two time periods. The first one is from 2007 to 2013, and the second one is 2014 to 2022. Next, please. And the report indicates a few findings, and it includes that the Pakistan's exports to European Union have increased from 5.7 billion US dollars in 2013 to 7.6 billion US dollars in 2022 for 10 months. That is a 47% growth. Also, it indicates that Pakistan's exports to the European Union have increased from an aggregate of 37 billion US dollars in the first time period, that is 2007 till 2013, to 66 billion US dollars in the second time period. That is around 78% growth. We see that Pakistan's GSP plus utilization rate has been very high, that is 96.5%. However, Pakistan's proportion in European Union's total imports is hardly 0.3%. This utilization rate could be further increased by exhausting the most traded tariff lines, which includes chapter 42, 61, 62, and 63. These are annexed at the back of the report. For that, you can visit FNF's website. And in the absence of this preferential status, Pakistan would have to face an MFN tariff of 12% under the most traded articles. So Pakistan and European Union have been great trading partners for many years, and the exports to European Union is 35% of the total exports, and which is a topic of discussion today. This table on the screen shows the trade trends of Pakistan with the European Union, and we see a continuously increasing trend, pandemic exception, where Germany constitutes the highest proportion in Pakistan's exports, followed by Spain, Italy, and Netherlands. The report also indicates that the top 10 of Pakistan's exports to the European Union have been in textile sector, and almost 56% of Pakistan's total exports to European Union in 2020 were from textiles, and 76% from in 2021. This is a summary of the analysis, and what we see that the total exports, the aggregate exports to the European Union have increased from 37 billion US dollars in the first time period to an aggregate of 66 billion US dollars, and the proportion in total exports has also increased from 24.6% to 30.1%, and followed by a growth that is since the implementation of the GSP plus status, there has been almost 47% growth in Pakistan's exports to the European Union. And Pakistan's total exports to EU in past 15 years have been around 103 billion US dollars, and on average they are 6.5 billion US dollars. Next, please. In the last decade, the growth in Pakistan's exports to the EU is 4.6% per year, which seems to be under potential. So in that case, yes, please, next. We see that the proportion of exports to the other major destinations, that includes US and China, has also remained unchanged. You can see from the figures, within the same time period, the proportion of exports to the US has also just increased by 0.1%, whereas for China it has increased, but considering the longer time period, that does not seem desirable. Next, please. Also, we see that Pakistan for the past whole decade have had the highest revealed comparative advantage in textiles, and clothing does not have a revealed comparative advantage in capital goods. Please, next. For the past 3 decades, we see that the percentage of exports to GDP for Pakistan has actually reduced from 14.8% to 10% as compared with India, where it has increased from 7.1 to 18.7%. For Bangladesh, it has increased from 5.9 to 12%. For China, it has increased from 13.6 to 18.5%. We see less diversification in world exports. Next, please. Now we want to see how far Pakistan has been performing under the GSP plus, and we see that comparatively among the GSP beneficiaries, Pakistan has been performing better since it has a higher proportion. And also the utilization rate has been very high, that is 96.5%. Although an accumulated growth figure of 47% might not sound appealing, but we see that there has been a section-wise growth. Sections are mentioned on the screen for you, which are given in detail within the report. Please next. So in case Pakistan does not retain the status for the next 10 years, just highlighted by Ms. Birgit Lam, the current status expires on December 31st, 2023. For that, Pakistan has to reapply for the GSP plus status. However, if it does not get the status, Pakistan would be subject to MFN tariff of 12% in the most traded tariff lines, which are also annexed at the back of the report. Please next. So this study has also led to an understanding that European Union's import appetite is mostly concentrated in more sophisticated commodities, for which Pakistan does not have any proportion. But that's not concerning. What's even more concerning is that Pakistan could not increase its market share in the most traded tariff lines and could not go beyond 1.9%, 2.6%, 11.4%, or 1.4%. Also, only 3 of the top commodities being exported by Pakistan to the EU were part of the European Union's top 20 imports, as compared to India, that had 8, and Sri Lanka, that had 6. Next, please. At the same time, Pakistan also faces immense competition from its regional competitor, that is Bangladesh. Bangladesh, by the way, enjoys another status, that is everything but arms. Everything but arms allows Bangladesh to trade with the European Union, having 0% duties on all the tariff lines. And also Bangladesh is the largest proportion in European Union's imports among GSP beneficiaries, as compared to Pakistan, which has a 9% share, where Bangladesh has 24% share. Next, please. This report, Pakistan and the European Union under GSP Plus, it concludes that although Pakistan has been exporting to the European Union and has been enjoying this concessionary status in terms of preferential trade for the past 9 years, but it is unable to compete effectively in the region and hence could not grow into the most traded tariff lines. This has caused Pakistan to miss out on many opportunities as compared to its competitors. And according to a previous version of Pakistan Business Council report, if Pakistan is unable to retain the status for the next 10 years, it is going to suffer a loss of around $1.5 billion in the textile sector. Next, please. To the recommendation. Thank you. The report provides a few recommendations. I think my panelists are equipped enough and they're going to add into it. One is that there is a need to focus on tariff lines that constitute a higher proportion in European Union's most traded chapters, which include 61, 62, 63, and 42. Most of them are textile related chapters. And according to a study, GSP Plus has a maximum annual growth rate of 17.5% in all the sectors. So therefore, there needs to be a paradigm shift in the most traded GSP Plus eligible sectors. Also, we see that the demand for textile, worldwide demand, is also reducing for Pakistan. More foreign direct investment should be welcomed from the European Union. There is a need to find potential in all the sectors where there is in all the tariff lines, and not just restrict to textiles. The government must also ensure financing SMEs that contribute around 25% to the exports of Pakistan by giving them opportunities to tap into those untapped potential tariff lines. But once you involve SMEs into the export sector, the picture is going to be different. Apart from that, Pakistan's commercial counselors, which are located in the European Union, they can facilitate in increasing the demand for Pakistani products in Europe by targeting more of SMEs that are looking to procure from Pakistan, not just targeting a few large buyers. With that, but Bangladesh has been offering better prices, better quality, better packaging to the potential importers. So Pakistan must also focus on quality on packaging standards itself to fulfill the requirements being offered by the European Union. And this study indicated that Pakistan lost 35% of its exports in 2013. Due to energy crisis, and the crisis, the power supply to export-led manufacturers should be made mandatory. Lastly, Pakistan should try negotiating on items which it is already exporting to the European Union, but they are not GSP eligible. A few months back, next please. The fourth and the final monitoring mission by the European Union has been concluded. Post 2023, the picture is going to be different in case Pakistan does not get this preferential status again. So Pakistan needs to reapply for the GSP Plus, and this reapplication comes with more requirements in addition to the 27 UN conventions, including the human rights, the labor rights, and the climate change. Few alarming areas were highlighted by the monitoring mission pertaining to human and labor rights. So GSP Plus, it's not just about trade, it's rather about creating a better and open society, including environmentally sustainable society. But at the same time, we see that countries like Pakistan, they have a very high reliance on schemes like GSP Plus. Almost 30% of Pakistan's exports to the European Union are under GSP Plus, despite, and whereas 90% of the total exports to the European Union are also GSP Plus eligible. Despite us having the GSP Plus status, and countries like China and Vietnam who do not have this status, they outsell us. So we really need to identify where did we go wrong. European Union has PTAs, so the preferential trade agreements, in more than 70 countries, including India. Considering that Pakistan's average, Pakistan's FTAs are below the world average, we really need to see where did the things are not getting into the right direction. On that positive note, I think that there is sustainable trade policies going to be the trade policy, which should be evidence-based, research-based. A trade policy must include SMEs. There should be inclusion of all the sectors for a sustainable development. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sarah, for a very comprehensive presentation, and congratulations on this research. Next, I would like to come to my panel, and we have special remarks from the head of trade section, delegation of the European Union to Pakistan, and I'd like to invite Mr. Daniel Kloss.
Okay, thank you very much. Thanks a lot for inviting me. Thanks a lot for the organizing this panel on a very pertinent topic. Thanks to the Friedrich Naumann Stiftung and SDPI for the conference overall. Big welcome to the esteemed panelists, and really great to see so many people here in the room. I will speak perhaps a little bit more about the basics of GSP Plus and the political side, because I'm not an economist, so I barely can manage my own personal finances. I won't venture into any sort of economic or trade theory. But perhaps it helps to get the basics right, because GSP Plus is not only a very sort of strange acronym, strange term, but there are a lot of sort of technicalities that are perhaps confusing. Bolivia, Cape Verde, Kyrgyzstan, Mongolia, Pakistan, the Philippines, Sri Lanka, and Uzbekistan. What do these very different countries have in common. You might have guessed it, they all benefit from GSP+. GSP+ stands for General Scheme of Preferences. And as the term says, this provides preferential access to the European single market. The European single market is a market of nearly 450 million people. It's a unilateral scheme. So the EU grants this to the countries, not asking any similar preferential access in return. So this makes it very different from any free trade agreement. And if we're discussing about the possibility of upgrading EU-Pakistan trade relations through a free trade agreement, we need to keep that in mind. Pakistan, as Sarah already mentioned, is the largest beneficiary of the scheme among the 9 countries benefiting from GSP+. Over 95% of Pakistan's exports to the EU fall under the preferential access provided by GSP+. And clearly, if we look at the statistics, there has been a considerable growth in Pakistan's export into the EU. From 2010 to 2020, exports have nearly doubled, and we clearly see an acceleration when GSP+ was introduced in 2014. Exports to the EU amount to 28% of all Pakistan's exports in 2020. So that's considerably ahead of the second largest export destination, the US, which is around 20%, and then China below 10%. If you read the papers and also sometimes social media comments by other diplomatic missions, you will read the US is the largest export destination, or Germany is, etc. That's simply because a lot of statistics, of course, break it down into bilateral national trade flows. So from Pakistan to Germany, from Pakistan to the Netherlands, etc. But, and that's really important for you to understand, the EU is a single market. That means even if perhaps Pakistan exports to Germany, de facto they're exporting to the EU, because perhaps the client sitting in Germany will then have customers across the Union. So that's why the European single market. Of course, the question, when we look at the historical data, question of is the increase in exports due to GSP+ alone? Does it reflect an increase in competitiveness? Is Pakistan using GSP+ to the full extent? And what could be done to benefit more or for more Pakistanis to benefit from GSP+? I leave that up to the experts to discuss. I'll just give you some more basics. So GSP+ is one of the 3 variants of what the EU has on offer under the GSP+ approach. So there's standard GSP. Standard GSP is a duty reduction, not a complete waiver. A duty reduction on 66% of the tariff lines for exports. And developing countries get GSP+, sorry, I will always say GSP+, but I have to stop after the P. So developing countries get GSP, the standard GSP, automatically as soon as they're classified as being below upper middle income status according to the World Bank. And if they don't have any other more preferential access to the EU market. GSP+, so kind of the special version of GSP, is lowering this duty reduction to 0. So 0 duties on 66% of the tariff lines. But in exchange, the EU expects the beneficiary countries to demonstrate progress on core human rights issues, labor rights, governance, and other international conventions. I'll get to that in a bit. And then the third version is, as Sarah already mentioned briefly, everything but arms, EBA. That is a complete duty-free access to the EU single market, except, as the title already suggests, for arms and weapons, complete free access for least developed countries. So, for example, Bangladesh benefits from EBA at the moment. It doesn't apply for Pakistan, obviously. Perhaps you might ask, okay, so the European Union opens its doors to Pakistani exports. That's very nice. What does it actually cost the European Union to waive duties? Of course, that's difficult to estimate because you don't know how much export would happen if there wasn't GSP+, but we assume it's around 550 million euros of tariffs that the European Union is losing. So that's quite a chunk, right? 550 million euro worth of duties that are waived. What would happen if GSP Plus is withdrawn from Pakistan? Then, as I mentioned earlier, by default, Pakistan would fall into the standard GSP category. And that is so preferential duties of around 6 to 9% on 66% of the duty lines. And that, of course, would be quite would have quite an impact on the competition. Now, let's step back a little bit further and think about why is the EU doing that? What's the objective actually of GSP+? Actually, there are two objectives. One is poverty reduction, the other one is sustainable development. So the idea on the one hand is by expanding exports of a country, you contribute to poverty reduction. So this, you could say, is classic trickle-down logic. More business will eventually lead to the population at large benefiting from it. Whether trickle-down works or not, again, I leave that to the experts. But if you look at the stated objective of GSP, you see that the EU already looks at the conditions under which this trickle-down might work by saying the second objective is sustainable development and good governance through progress on implementing international conventions. Right, so we want to make sure that the state provides the rights and the rule of law and the good governance under which economy can thrive and under which people can benefit from this economy for a better life of the country as a whole. And this is the area where the conditionalities come in, right? Pakistan is obliged to demonstrate progress on the implementation of 27 international conventions in order to maintain GSP Plus status. Very important here, these 27 conventions are not EU conventions. These are international conventions to which Pakistan has signed up and which Pakistan has ratified before being eligible for GSP Plus. So it's not the EU imposing a certain worldview on Pakistan, but rather Pakistan have signed up to international conventions that are supported by the vast majority of all countries around the globe. The EU is monitoring progress in this regard, especially through a report that is produced every 2 years. This year it's a little bit delayed due to the backlog of the pandemic. The report that is currently drafted by colleagues in Brussels, based also on the monitoring mission that was mentioned earlier, that took place in June, July, is going to be the last one under the current scheme because the scheme runs out next year. During the 10-year period of the scheme, a country can lose the GSP Plus status if it cannot demonstrate sufficient progress against these 27 conventions. And just to give you 2 examples that this is rarely happening, but it's a real possibility. Cambodia lost the everything but arms status in 2020 due to serious concerns related to human rights, especially freedom of expression and freedom of media. Sri Lanka got GSP Plus status again in 2017 after having gotten revoked the status in 2010 due to human rights abuses in the context of the civil war. Right, so it is a possibility that the EU decides to revoke the GSP Plus status. But as colleagues have already mentioned, but really I can only reiterate that way more important than the question of whether Pakistan will lose it in the current scheme that is anyway running out next year, is the question of the reapplication to the next scheme. That is the scheme itself. So the global system is currently still under discussion in Brussels. But then once the new scheme is defined, countries can apply and actually have to apply. There's no automatic rollover of having the benefits in the previous scheme to the new scheme. And reapplication is going to be difficult because the decision makers are very different. Once you're in the club, to put it in a very sort of simple way, once you're in the club, it's my colleagues in Brussels basically deciding whether or not you remain in the club. And you need to, of course, demonstrate. That is going to be much more difficult. You really need to make your case with presenting promises, a plan for how Pakistan, as any other country that applies, will make further progress in respecting the different conventions, but also in order to make that argument in a convincing manner, you need to have a good track record. So basically, the promises of the future need to be grounded in tangible evidence of the progress made today. And that is the message we have been passing to the government of Pakistan and various other stakeholders all along. So now is a crucial time to prepare for the reapplication by, on the one hand, thinking about what Pakistan can do in the future, but also to make further progress right here, right now, to increase the chances that GSP Plus will apply to Pakistan also as of 2024. Before I conclude with this kind of very basic introduction, I just want to say it's, of course, for the EU, it's not just about GSP Plus. It's in Pakistan, we are supporting very actively the various institutions in doing their part in implementing the international conventions. We have programs on the rule of law, on human rights, on labor rights, etc. So we're not only kind of demanding progress, we're actively helping the government and the country through our quite vast development portfolio. With that, I hope you kind of got the basics right. With that, I'm really happy to hear the experts explain us more what does that mean in terms of economics and trade potential. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Daniel, for breaking this down into really simple blocks, I would say, blocks of knowledge, evidence, and I can see that many of the colleagues required that information. So thank you for that. Two questions on which, of course, we can engage during the Q&A or later, maybe after the session, you know. One that we get asked, for example, that why were the rules of the game changed? For example, we are moving from a renewal process to a reapplication process. You know, it's something new for developing countries. They were pretty much accustomed to what was required for the renewal process. So this is like a competition from really starting from square one, of course. And then, of course, then there's the other question of countries, including India, but also economically much smaller countries in Asia Pacific, aiming higher than GSP Plus. So they're engaging with European Union for an FTA. So one of the natural questions that comes to mind is that, is Pakistan aiming low, given that we have been in GSP plus for so many years and still we are asking for GSP plus, you know? So that's another question that comes to mind, but of course, happy to discuss later if we have the time. I now have the honor of inviting Mr. Aftab Haider Saab, a very senior civil servant and currently Chief Executive Officer of Pakistan, a single window. Great innovation on our trade horizon, I would say. I encourage all to actually visit the website of Pakistan Single Window, including the trade portal that they have established under his leadership. And of course, we are very fortunate to have a partnership with them. We run the Trade Talks podcast, which is there on STPI's and PSW's website. So, sir, over to you for your inputs, please.
Thank you very much, Dr. Waqar Saab, for a very kind introduction. I never thought I was a senior civil servant before resigning from civil services last year, but thank you very much for that as well. Thank you very much to SDPI and FNF for hosting us today on this panel. It's indeed an absolute honor and a delight to be sitting on the same panel with Gonzalo and Usman joining online and Dr. Waqar over there as the moderator. Thank you very much. My contribution to this talk would be less academic, because I am not an academic by training or by profession, but more from the perspective of a public policy practitioner who happens to be leading a governance reform project where we are leveraging technology for bringing changes, especially in the cross-border trade sector. And I will be taking this opportunity to talk a little bit about the FTA and GSP impact on innovation and growth in Pakistan's economy, which are the key drivers of productivity and global competitiveness in the modern world. When I was invited by the SDPI colleagues to speak on this topic, I did a quick search on Pakistan's ranking on the Global Competitiveness Index. 110 out of 142, I guess, out of 141. I searched back a few years to see how Pakistan had been doing historically, especially since after joining the GSP Plus program and signing various FTAs. And to be honest, I didn't feel amused or thrilled to look at the progress. The second fact that struck me as interesting was that although Pakistan has signed FTAs with a number of countries, including China, Sri Lanka, Malaysia, the bulk of our exports go to countries with which we don't have a preferential or free trade agreement in place, namely United States. And that means that we are competing on MFN rates for products in which we could have taken advantage if we had a trade agreement in place with them. Hence, the impact of these FTAs in creating new trade may not be as significant yet as we hoped for. And third, I've also found it intriguing that most of Pakistan exports to its FTA and GSP partners are concentrated in the 5 traditional sectors, which are also mentioned at textiles, garments, sports, leather, surgical goods, and in which we are increasingly facing competition from other countries which are rising up the value chain. We severely lack the capacity or the access or the product diversity to tap into the growing demand of other commodities and services that are very much in demand in the European Union or in the global markets. And which are driving the growth of Southeast Asian economies and other emerging economies. This leads us to the question of, are we really becoming competitive after joining the FTAs and GSP Plus programs? Has our enhanced access to the markets of our partner countries resulted in increased productivity, product diversification, innovation, and growth at home? Are we creating exportable surpluses that would find markets in countries on MFN rates, competing on their price and quality? I'm afraid the answer to most of these questions would not be a straight yes. Pakistan has been and still is a closed economy. I was looking at an IMF report which mentioned that the share of imports and exports forms a very small percentage of our overall GDP. At the same report quoted that the share of exports in our GDP fell from the peak of 15% in 2013 to 11% in 2020. And our share in global exports just constitutes 0.13% of the global trade. And that too mostly comprises of the same products that I mentioned before. Our export mix lacks sophistication, We offer a smaller number of unique products in most of our peer countries and are steadily facing competition from other countries, moving up the value chain. So what do we need to do to become more competitive? The World Economic Forum defines competitiveness as a set of policies, institutions, and factors that determine the level of productivity of a country. And perhaps this will be a good time to reflect on whether we are transforming and developing our institutions and policies that support innovation and growth. We are living what is called as the fourth industrial revolution, in which the world has moved beyond simple digitization, computerization, and automation towards cyber physical systems. We are talking about disruptive technologies. We are talking about Internet of Things, blockchain, artificial intelligence, machine learning, virtual reality. And interestingly, most of these technologies are also finding quite a few applications in the cross-border trade ecosystem. We have all seen how technology has revolutionized transportation and communication over the past several decades, and how it has begun to shift the structure and configuration of trade. Developing countries, smaller businesses now have new opportunities as technology becomes the new great equalizer between countries, separated by a natural endowment of the factors of production. Technological innovation will enhance productivity, improve efficiency, lower transportation and communication costs, integrate logistics and global supply chains, improve connectivity on the business-to-business level, on a country-to-country level, and diminish the cost of trade. Already, the technology innovation is reshaping global trade flows by lowering transaction costs. Think about the single window initiative. What we do is basically reduce the cost of doing business by eliminating paper-based processes. Technology innovation is changing production processes. Think about artificial intelligence, 3D printing, and also creating new goods. Who would have thought that electric vehicles would be commercialized in the markets a few decades ago, for example? Think about renewables, think about digital goods. So early movers will have first advantage as we move progressively onwards towards a digital economy. The question is, are we ready? And in answer to this question, probably lies the future of our trade competitiveness. Technology innovation will impact people and businesses and government. On the government side, it is heartening to see initiatives emerging and taking shape to rationalize and reduce the regulatory burden on businesses by leveraging technology. Pakistan Single Window, that I have the honor to lead since last year, is one such initiative by the federal government that is creating a digital platform for connecting 77 government agencies, customs, banks, traders, and private sector service providers for customs and regulatory clearances. In addition, an electronic trade information portal provides a single access points for all import, export, and transit related information. And Sarah, when you need information again about the trade, you can simply access the trade information portal of Pakistan, which is providing the latest stats based on customs data on the imports, exports, and transit, along with top 25 destinations that we export to, or the top 25 destinations that we import from. We are building a port community system that will be connecting shipping, logistics, and transportation sectors at the seaports, airports, and the land ports. But what is more important to note here is that this initiative is just not technology oriented, but also involves significant business process reengineering, elimination or digitization of documents, and harmonization of information requirements by all the trade regulators. I'm also happy to note that Single Window is not the only initiative in the government sector. There are other government departments who are either who have started or have just or are already much ahead on their own journeys towards digital transformation. For example, the Drug Regulatory Authority of Pakistan, the Board of Investment, the Special Technology Zone Authority, the Export Processing Zone Authority, to name a few. Just last week, I guess, SECP, BOI, and STZA signed an MOU for the online registration of businesses. The BOI-led Pakistan Regulatory Modernization Initiative is another example of the government of Pakistan's effort for enhancing ease of doing business. New technologies are resulting in digital platforms being created that facilitate trade and open new markets. Digitization is enabling SMEs, women, disadvantaged communities, and remote locations to join the global value chains. Just as a very small example, when we digitized the customs registration process, it reduced 22 documents that were required to get an ID, after which you could transact import-export transactions through customs. And it also allowed women-led businesses, small and medium enterprises, businesses located in remote areas which did not have access to custom house, to just go on the portal, register themselves as importers and exporters, and begin transacting the business. So this is what technology does. Digitalization is enabling businesses to introduce process efficiencies and improve their productivity. However, this does not mean that businesses will become competitive overnight. No amount of FTAs or GSP plus statuses, even though they are extremely desirable, doesn't mean that I'm not a fan of these agreements. But they are not going to help us out if we don't put our own house in order. If we are not encouraging innovation and growth in our regulatory environment, in the public sector, as well as in the private sector. The private sector still needs to significantly invest in R&D for creating new differentiated products and services that are in demand in foreign markets, and they need to embrace technology to transform their businesses, including their production processes. They would still need government support in establishing new centers of operations and benefiting from a stable macroeconomic situation, lower cost of energy, improved access to capital, a fair and equitable taxation policy, and legal framework that protects the rights of investors, enforce contracts, and facilitates government to business and business to business interactions. Government on its own will also need to make the right sort of regulatory reforms, keeping within the regulatory framework that is in place to keep pace with technological, economic, and societal challenges, to reduce barriers to entry, to allow innovators to enter the market, and to promote competition, and thereby increase productivity, which enhances competitiveness. The impact of these efforts goes beyond simply automating the processes, as they are a catalyst for digital transformation of service providers and other private sector businesses, and are triggering a new way of thinking amongst the bureaucracy and government institutions on how to negotiate between trade facilitation and effective controls, what we call the smart controls. In addition, these efforts will go a long way in creating trust and credibility of the government organizations amongst the trading partners that will translate into more efficient, secure, and reliable supply chains, and consequently increase trade with Pakistan. This brings me to the end of my talk here. I'm sorry if I'm leaving you with more questions than answers that I could provide, but in my view, the discussion on the impact of FTAs and GSP programs on Pakistan's trade competitiveness will remain incomplete without taking a 360-degree view of the entire trade ecosystem, including the impact of these agreements on the overall ability of the country to export and take part in the global value chains, even if you are not part of any trade agreement. Thank you very much for a patient hearing.
Thank you, Aftab Saab, and thank you for highlighting that the glass is half full. And of course, we have places to go. I want to turn to Gonzalo and Ms. Mariani, but I've been told that Mr. Usman Khan couldn't join and he's online. So if he's available for his brief. Yes, Usman Saab, please go ahead.
Thank you, Waqar.
Team leader for Remit program. Please, sir.
Thank you, Waqar. Thank you, everyone, this opportunity. Sorry. In fact, just on the topic, that's the reason why I've not been able to join. I'm in Karachi. I had a few sessions with the Pakistan Business Council and Overseas Chamber on the current situation on investment and also looking at from a trade perspective. And sort of a lot of things have been talked about, and especially a detailed presentation, but I'll take a slightly different take on some of the things, in terms of future course of actions that one can really look at. I think while we see the increase in the exports, I think one of the areas that needs to be looked at is the limited success in diversification of that export basket. Within that, we've not been able to. So the export increments normally come in the garment sector, but other areas which are also part of the GSP plus program, especially in agriculture and other areas, I think the growth is not that substantial. So I think the diversity of the diversification of the export basket has been limited on that aspect. And that, I think, rather than an issue with the GSP plus, is also more looking at internal issues that the economy face, where finding that exportable surplus of quality of goods that can be exported. Just to sort of give an example, a few years ago, I was working with the fan industry, and we were trying to work on the CE compliance, which is one of the regulatory requirements to enter into the EU market. But I mean, I was sitting in those meetings, but looking at the design of some of the fans that we were manufacturing, one would really find no market for those in the EU market. So I think it's also about looking at different aspects, and Aftab sort of mentioned about the GCI index, and I think it's a complex index which talks about different aspects of it. So while enabling access to EU market is there, but I think we need to look at the internal capability and capacities as well to be able to really garner that growth. And the question that Vagar, you sort of said that why do we still need to extend that GSP status and why we are not really competitive, probably is more of looking at internal issues. I mean, we are seeing a lot of deindustrialization happening as well, a lot of companies exiting as well because of the issues that we face internally. And I think those are the problems that needs to be simultaneously looked at if we really want to talk about the overall competitiveness and sort of reducing the reliance on such preferential sort of arrangements going forward and having the own capabilities. I think there are historic examples as well that one can really look at. The quota lifting in the garment sector was a surprise as well, where the general anticipation was that suddenly exports will soar after that because we'll be coming out of that limited quota regime. But actually what we saw was a lot of investment in that time really took a decline because we were not able to compete. And suddenly when we were open to competition, we realized that we did not have the competitiveness. So whilst these protective regimes do help, I think they also hide some of the competitiveness issues. So I think the internalization and an assessment of if we are using this period of grace, which I can call, to really building upon our competitiveness so that when we open up, are we able to really compete globally is really a question that need to answer. So I'll stop on that, and I apologize not being there in person was due to some unforeseen. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Usman Sab, and I think very well put that internal factors also, of course, are responsible for low uptake of any such market access facility. Let me now turn to our next distinguished panelist, Mr. Gonzalo Varela, who's senior economist with the World Bank Group.
Thank you, Bakar. Thank you, SDPI, for the invitation. I read the report. I think Sarah did a fantastic job. It's super interesting, filled with evidence, and I would say I agree with 90% of the recommendations. And I will structure my remarks around. We didn't coordinate with Aftab, but around a lot of what Aftab said, and I'll try to add on that theme. And I also want to mention I'm honored to be in this panel with probably two of the most dynamic civil servants. I know Aftab said it's not a civil servant anymore, but one of the two of the most dynamic civil servants in the current administration. So that's an honor. So we're talking trade competitiveness here, and we're talking about GSP and FTAs, and do they help, do they not? And I think at the end of the day, this is a conversation about are these schemes, or is trade in general something that helps productivity? And that's the crucial question. And that's why I think I related a lot to what Aftab said. The challenge of productivity in Pakistan is a key challenge. Today, an average Pakistani worker adds 40% more value than it did 30 years ago. 40% more value. Is that a lot more or not much more? Well, let's see what the Vietnamese do. So the average Vietnamese worker adds 330% more value than it did 30 years ago. Huge difference. What drove that? What was that big difference between Pakistan and Vietnam, between those paths of development of productivity that diverged? And those paths were how they integrated into the world, mainly through trade agreements. And what we see is that Vietnam did very well in attracting a lot of foreign direct investment, and with a lot of foreign direct investment managed to build a huge export platform. And to build that export platform also had to open up its borders to imports. So in a way, openness to trade for Vietnam was a huge learning platform. And you can think about three learning engines that are there at work, and one is FDI, another is exports, and another one is imports. And Daniel was, when he was talking about GSP, he said, you know, are exports conducive to more productivity? You know, that's a question. And I would say, yes, they are conducive. Exports are conducive to more productivity. Imports are conducive to more productivity. FDI is conducive to more productivity. And we looked at that for the Pakistani case, because there's a lot of discussion, oh, Pakistan is different. Things that work in our countries don't work in Pakistan. We are special. And I'm sure that Pakistan is special, but there are certain things that work also in Pakistan. So we recently launched a report, and I'm going to do a little bit of publicity. It's called From Swimming in Sand to High and Sustainable Growth. And in this report, we look at productivity and how trade and productivity are interlinked. And what we see is that firms that export are more productive, but not only are more productive, they become more productive as they export more. So exporting is good for productivity in Pakistan, but importantly, importing is also good. So when you open up and when you reduce trade costs, as the Pakistan single window is doing, that is helping firms become more productive because they can have access to technologies that they didn't have before. And that is a very important source of learning for firms, accessing technologies, accessing intermediate inputs, and even the competition that they face when there is more imports. They may not like the competition, but for the economy as a whole, that competition is a good thing. And we see that in reducing import barriers, leading to more productivity, leading to more sales, and also leading to better paid workers. So leading to wages increasing too. And FDI is another learning engine. And FDI has I was looking at recently Interloop, that is one of the largest exporters in Pakistan, is introducing full traceability for its cotton. Europeans love traceability. They love traceability in beef, but they also like traceability in many other things. So basically what they want to see is, where is the cotton coming from? Is the cotton sustainably produced? Is the cotton organic or not? If you have a label of organic, is it really organic? And for that, you need full traceability. To introduce the full traceability, Interloop is relying on important services providers. Is relying on an internet connectivity that is very good, on telecom infrastructure. All of that is facilitated when you have dynamic multinationals that come and invest in these sectors, in sophisticated business services, in sophisticated software development, in telecom infrastructure, that work together with domestic companies and improve the quality of those services in upstream sectors. That FDI in upstream services sector is something that facilitated Interloop in developing this full traceability of the cotton value chain. And it can, this is just one example, but there are many others. So what we see when we look at the data is that more FDI in upstream services sectors has helped the productivity of firms in manufacturing downstream that use these services intensively. So in a nutshell, what we find is that trade has been good for productivity in Pakistan. The issue is that these three engines of learning, FDI, imports, and exports, have actually been shrinking lately. And they have been shrinking a lot. And in part, they have been shrinking because of policies that have been implemented. And why have policies worked against this productivity enhancing platform that is trade and integration? And part of the issue is that, and you will have heard this a lot, Pakistan is from balance of payments crisis into balance of payments crisis, and now we are facing another one. And one distinctive feature of Pakistan is that Pakistan uses trade policy as a balance of payments policy, and it shouldn't. It should use fiscal, exchange rate policy, monetary policy to fix the balance of payments deficit problems, but instead it uses trade policies. And by using trade policies, it shoots itself in the foot somehow. Because say when you have a large trade deficit, you should let the exchange rate to appreciate, or you should constrain your fiscal, but instead you put import barriers. And by putting import barriers, you're making it very difficult for exporters to be able to export more, because exporters need to import parts and components. So if you go and ask today, exporters are having trouble opening letters of credit to import machinery, equipment, spare parts even. And that is making the problem of the trade deficit even worse, because yes, you're constraining imports, but at the same time, that is hurting your exports. On the services sector side, another policy that tends to introduce when you have balance of payments problem, that is another way of shooting yourself in the foot, is putting capital controls or controls to avoid the outflows of capital or payments in foreign currency. When you have, for example, services, business services that have been exporting a lot out of Pakistan, software developers, freelancers, these services providers need to make payments to suppliers that are somewhere else in the world. And to do that, they need to have accounts in foreign currency and be able to pay foreign currency to our countries. And in general, you have restrictions that are imposed so that dollars don't get out. And by putting that restriction so that dollars don't get out, you don't get the dollars in. These services providers, these exporters of software move their accounts to Dubai and don't bring the money back in Pakistan. So when you put restrictions for money to go out, actually you're impeding money to come in. So this have been, in a nutshell, some policies that have hurt the trade engines as learning platforms. And let me just perhaps finish with where the potential is and what can we do. And as I was thinking about my intervention, about a year ago, we did a study on export potentials out of Pakistan. We estimated that the untapped export potential of Pakistan is about $61 billion a year. And of that, 8.5 billion is with the European Union. So you have a lot of space for taking more advantage of GSP plus. You have a high utilization rate, that's true, but you could expand much more, sell more of what you're selling. And the potential is far away. You have a lot of space to move and expand exports. But where most of the potential is in the region. You have about $14 billion of untapped potential with China, with which you have a free trade agreement. Of course, you have 12 billion with India, which you don't trade. And again, the issue of regional integration, countries that have integrated in what we call global value chains, actually these value chains weren't really global, they were regional. So if you look at, you have factory Asia around China, you have Vietnam supplying to China, Cambodia supplying to China, even Japan. You have factory US, and then you have Mexican firms supplying to the US, Canadian firms supplying to the US, and then you have factory Europe, and then you have France and Germany and Italy. So the region is very important. So if you don't trade with the region, that's a big obstacle you're going to have to be able to trade more, attract more FDI. So that's a big challenge. And the origin of the European Union was a conflict between France and Germany, and a way of saying, you know what, the more integrated you are, then the least likely it is that the conflict will escalate. So this is something that I think should be put on the table and discussed extensively, because there's a huge opportunity cost there. The potential is huge, but I think we need to rethink how we do policy, but also some of these political choices that have been made that are not so much related with typical economic policy, that are related with other sort of policies. So I'll stop here, but happy to expand later.
Thank you, Gonzalo. Really appreciate it. Thank you for adding to the discussion around the linkages between trade and productivity, firm learning, and of course, the interesting example of the full cotton traceability, and happy to, of course, also inform the gathering that with Gonzalo, of course, STPI is working on two very important things. One is to look into the impact of national tariff policy and the impact it had on the small and medium-sized firms in Pakistan, and also the effectiveness of the export promotion schemes, which FBR leads. And we'll be happy to share the findings in the coming days. Let me now turn to our next distinguished panelist, Ms. Aisha Moriani, who is Additional Secretary, Ministry of IT and Telecom. And Ms. Moriani has been really at the forefront, one of the really unsung heroes, if I can say, during the COVID times, of not only pushing the e-commerce policy that we now have. We have e-commerce councils at the federal and provincial level, mobilizing the action matrix at the end of that e-commerce policy. And of course, there are a lot of young minds over here and people who are listening to us online over the live stream. And we had a very fascinating session informing us how freelancing in Pakistan has grown over the past few years, particularly during the COVID times. And of course, Madam had a very large role to play in making that policy or that ecosystem happen. And while, of course, we have, I'm sure Madam has a lot to comment on now because she comes in at last after the panel. But maybe one of the questions related to this very topic is that what comes to mind is that Pakistan has been conservative when it comes to the design of our free trade agreements. We don't see trade and services being featured so much in what we are negotiating with Turkey or in the revised FTA that we negotiated with China. Of course, we are outsiders to the system, but Madam can probably inform us further, that whether this is a step-by-step approach or whether this conservatism will require another disruption. So over to you, Madam, please. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Very interesting discussion, and it's really an honor and privilege for me to be part of this August gathering here, and especially very accomplished people in the panel. I agree with what has been said by the previous speakers. I would just like to add one thing, that the ideal, efficient global trade deal would be that is done by the WTO, because that will bring the maximum efficiency. So all of us are, having various sort of agreements which are not the optimal level agreements. And keeping in view that, FTA is the next best option. So Pakistan entered in several FTAs. And I completely agree that those agreements were not one of the best. But keeping in view the conditions in which those were negotiated, and Pakistan was also learning while negotiating and implementing those FTAs. And as we found out some of the deficiencies, those are negotiated again. With China also, we renegotiated some of the things which were part of the first phase of FTA. And I think a very important part of any FTA would be investment. And when we were having an FTA with China, investment was also very much part of it. And I would say that the way CPEC has developed, it has actually complemented and the FTA, because the investment in the infrastructure and the energy was extremely important, because the energy deficit that we faced in 2013 was played a very negative role on our exports. So that, one very dark spot gave this realization that, enough investment in the energy has to be done by, all the resources that are available. So at that time, China came up with that kind of an investment. Now, some of those, basic needs are met, and now we are looking at having more environment-friendly options, and we want to become more environment-based economy. I would say that the GSP Plus that we are having with the European Union, probably it is also an opportunity for EU to initiate a more export-oriented green economy in Pakistan, because the kind of loss and damage that Pakistan has faced because of a natural calamity, while we don't really contribute to the factors which are leading to that kind of a loss and damage. So I think it's an opportunity that while we are talking about GSP Plus, GSP plus is half embrace, I would say, for Pakistan. The full embrace would be to make Pakistan partner in the Global Gateway Initiative, and also develop an export-oriented green economy pact with Pakistan. I think these are the two initiatives which will help Pakistan to increase its competitiveness, because it will include infrastructure development as well as digital connectivity, which my previous speakers have highlighted are very important for achieving competitiveness and regional connectivity. So I think these are the areas which are not yet explored in terms of making EU a real trading partner. So my suggestion would be that we need to look at these two areas as well while developing our trade relations with the European Union. And on the other side, I think with the other FTAs, services has a huge scope. Now we are negotiating with the GCC, and services is part of it. In fact, we are introducing a chapter on e-commerce as well. Because if we look at various FTAs that are being negotiated, many countries are having a separate chapter on e-commerce. So that's an area which has a huge potential. And it's not very difficult actually to work on that, because a lot of it is already included in the services. So it's certain part of services which can be covered under e-commerce, such as financial services or telecom services, retail services, logistic services, and Pakistan has already opened its telecom services. So we can get a lot of FDI in that area by having specific agreements in our FTAs on e-commerce. And then services with China, services is very much part of it. And I think GSP Plus does not cover services. So that is also an area where probably EU can think that if they add certain aspects of services in the GSP Plus, that would be really beneficial for countries like Pakistan. Some of the policies that are really right now focusing on increasing our competitiveness is HR development in the IT sector. Because we every year produce 25 to 26,000 IT graduates in Pakistan. And all of them are English speaking. So there is huge potential with more than 200 million population and youth bulge that we can provide a lot of IT services to EU countries. One of the initiatives that government has taken is academia industry bridge. So under that program, we have created a consortium of the industry, and industry is teaching IT graduates in their last semesters. They are having an attachment with the industry, and then in the 7th and 8th semester, industry people go and teach some of the courses. New modules have been developed which are aligned with the new technology needs. So these are some of the interventions which are really focused on increasing productivity and HR development. And as Gonzalo mentioned, that the textile sector is also, trying to adopt technology. So having more and more IT equipped HR available in the country, I think it will be a good omen for technology adoption. In the textile policy, which was approved last year, there is a special emphasis on training of HR and adoption of technology. So I think the next growth phase of Pakistan is linked with investment in technology, not just in infrastructure, but in HR as well. E-commerce was mentioned by you. Yeah, I think that policy has really helped in developing the ecosystem. So we are also focusing a lot on developing the startup ecosystem. Ignite has that innovation fund, and we are working closely with diaspora as well as all the regulators, State Bank, SSCP, and FPR to strengthen that ecosystem. So hopefully you will see a lot of positive things happening in Pakistan.
Thank you, madam. Really appreciate it. Now, I'm told that we should not be eating into the lunchtime. And while, of course, this has been a longish panel discussion, but I do want to come to some very esteemed colleagues who are there in the audience. But if I can request them that if there are questions, we can sort of take the questions during the lunchtime. And we can engage with our panelists during the lunchtime. For now, if anyone has to contribute to this question specifically, apart from what the panelists have said, they may like to include or inform us about their observations as well. And of course, we can take the Q&A during the bilateral engagement part. So maybe I wanted to invite Dr. Safdar into the conversation, and if we can give him the mic.
Thanks, Waqar, and this has been wonderful to be among all the colleagues. And Waqar and me, we go a long way back on EU-Pakistan relations when we were trying to have an FTA with EU, and Sussex University carried out a study not recommending FTA. So Waqar did a CG, and we did a critical report on that Sussex University study, and we still presented a case. I remember I went to Brussels in March 2009. Then I was DG, Pakistan Institute of Trade and Development. And I think that's what Waqar also hinted, that we should not take this part as a whole. GSP plus, all said and done, is a part of Pakistan-EU relationship. We have been using ambitious names, and I should also tell that I've been DG Trade Policy, and then I've been Pakistan Economic Minister to EU, and the last GSP plus, it was Ministry of Commerce or my dossier, which was negotiated because I was there from 2013 to 15, and I got done the first review also. So this EU-Pakistan 5-year engagement plan also had a certain ambition. But somehow, I think this has been hinted here, Aisha also, that, or Usman also hinted that sometimes these arrangements can have some unintended consequences, also masking your problems with competitiveness too. So that is there. So on the aspects of trade potential, not realizing that in report it has been brought out very well. We should have done much more to realize the promise of GSP plus. But two remarks before I go to Gonzalo's presentation. One is that the other side of the bet, that Pakistan would implement UN conventions in letter and spirit. We have tried, but I think EU delegation should have done a little bit more, in the sense that I myself had been pleading with the EU delegation at that time, and with Brussels colleague also, to focus more on factory level compliances. You see, 8 labor conventions, 8 environment conventions had EU delegation, and Brussels focused on factory level compliances and effected a genuine growth, genuine development in compliances at factory level. Pakistan would have been much better off. This was the first time that our business community became a stakeholder in the implementation of convention. So I'm not saying that the EU should not take interest in other conventions, but when there are 27 conventions, you have to prioritize. So that process of prioritization did not actually happen. And we all know that the scale is always socially compliant. You know, the bigger companies, even before GSP plus, were good in terms of social compliances. These were the medium companies which needed to improve their compliances, and that would have helped Pakistan and the inclusiveness, which is intended objective, as you also said, in terms of poverty alleviation. Now, the new GSP plus scheme, we do not still have the features of the scheme available with us. Aisha has presented green economy agreement in a rather positive way, but I'm thinking of carbon border adjustment measures which are being talked about, the European Green New Deal, and all this conversation about nearshoring and weaponizing trade in the context of Ukraine war. So we are a bit worried also that what the new GSP would have as additional elements. You see, you have the eligibility criteria. If that remains the same, we are still there, unfortunately. We should have graduated out of those criteria which brought us in the first place. Assessment of HR convention, that is also fine. But if new elements come in which give an impression of weaponizing trade, I think that would be something on which the people who are active in the think tank community should engage with Brussels and EU delegation also. Another element, when we analyze EU-Pakistan relationship, we do not give enough weightage to the excellent performance of EU FDI or EU origin multinational corporations in Pakistan. Now, we do talk about the costs, let's say 550 million. I think it's annual, perhaps, the foregone revenue by EU, but we have other areas of prosperous businesses for EU in the country also. The domestic competition scene and role of these companies, we talked about that another day. Our domestic commerce has a problem. We have been having investment in manufacturing for the local market, not for the exports. And Gonzalo has talked about the non-desirability of capital controls. That's also a very problematic issue that has the time come for reconsidering the old, totally unregulated FDI regimes. If you ask me, we have mismanaged our globalization very badly. And that has resulted in such an incentive structure which now nobody is willing to leave. So those issues stay there. Well, I have heard Gonzalo before, and we have discussed also. My last comment is that prescribing the same thing again more in higher quantities, I think we need to pause. Our economy is in a very bad shape. This is a cumulative result of the process which some responsibility going to the kind of liberalization that we did. So it's a common cause of the development partners and the policymakers and the businesses to be a little bit more critical about our policies. I agree that we should not really use trade policy for balance of payment crisis, but the way things have panned out, our GDP is consumption-based, our consumption is import-based. So what options do we have? And we, unfortunately, we needed to do much more at the domestic front. We have given an incentive structure that the people who have money go to real estate or to other speculative kind of ventures instead of going to the hard work that is required in exports and being much more competitive. So I agree, and we should all agree that more is to be done on our side. And I think Aisha is here, must say that their ministry is doing much more. I mean, digital is perhaps the future, but there are some long-standing policy debates which need to happen on the kind of liberalization, because I at least feel that this new opportunity, that is liberalization of services, can be a huge challenge also if we do not manage it well. Thank you very much, Wakar.
Thank you, Dr. Safdar. Maybe I'll take two more inputs and then we can close Dr. Samad and then the gentleman at the back.
Thank you so much, Wakar, and thanks the panelists. Let me share my experiences currently. Wakar, we are a part of the CARIC-wide FTA. CARIC is the 11-member countries intergovernmental organization. I think one of the real, I would say the question that we need to highlight here is, for the sake of the discussion, is that I think the question is that how effectively we can design and formulate an FTA. Dr. Wakar, it's been really a process engagement process, especially if we can see the recent development after the COVID, the engagement of the services sectors, and of course, with all this digitalization initiative that has been around us. So it's been really a process engagement process. Just to give an example from the first China and Peru FTA that was signed in, I think, in 2002, the significance was, they included one of the item, and that was the cherry in their FTA. And the reason for the inclusion of that FTA was the seasonal variation in China and Peru in the production of the cherry. So that was the seriousness, I think, that is required once we go for the formulation in the designing of the FTA. So that is first thing that I wanted to highlight here. Secondly, Wakar, again, we've been recently discussing it. There's a lot. I think once you sign the FTA, there's a lot that has been on your shoulder after signing the FTA. And again, to give an example from the China that currently, I think, signed around 17 FTAs. Right after signing FTA, Wakar, they organize 100 of the trainings, especially for the businesses community and for the exporters. And I think one of the sectors, I can't remember exactly, but 4,000 trainings were organized for them so that they can effectively understand the FTA and then how they can basically reach out to the market for their maximum benefits. Similarly, in Singapore, recently, there's a lots of kind of freelancer, like they're available free of cost. They can help the business community so that they can avail the opportunity for getting maximum out of the FTAs. So that is the second thing, that after or the post FTA kind of exercises that we need to focus more here in Pakistan as well. And lastly, my colleagues have been already discussed it, but I think still we need lots and lots for the trade facilitation reforms. Wakar has been again. There's a lots of things. I don't have time here, but we can discuss it later. But three things, Wakar: the effectiveness or the seriousness that has been required for the formulation of this FTA, then the post-FTA exercises, and then the trade facilitation reforms. I think that are some of the key to get maximum out of the FTA. Thank you.
Thank you. And last input, sir. बिल्कुल end पे जो सर है सर, हमने सवाल नहीं पूछना सर, just your input.
Thank you, Dr. Vikar. My name is Imran Sheikh, and I'm from Basmati Rice Exports. So you have talked about interloop, you have talked about cherries, and I just want to make that in our country, we are taking that we are not good policy makers. We are not good negotiators. We have not good expertise while making our policies. But one thing is that when a basmati rice exports in Europe, it is treated as a raw material and it is not allowed to have value-added basmati in Europe. So the policies are also not convincing. And I'm afraid that we are talking about half embracing, and Daniel is sharing that half embracing may also be lifted. So I'm a little bit skeptic and want to request that if in Pakistan we can source Ben's original basmati rice at our factory level and we can comply, but my request is that include rice in GSP plus and our exporters and our retailers, because we have complied all the conventions 27 at our basmati rice fields. We are complying. So if it is included that our rice should also be sourced, if not as a raw material, but as a finished, and it should be allowed. Because last thing is that if you export raw material, whole grain, duty is 0. But if you export white rice, that is after in Europe, it is 200% duty on that. So we need more from you because we are vulnerable and we have not contributed anything in greenhouse below 1%, and we are highly vulnerable to countries. We are adjacent. And one more thing, that China is offering too much to the ASEAN that we are actually having. So it is all about a win-win situation. And it's just my thoughts that we have something that to share with Daniel and all of them. Thank you.
Thank you, and happy to see Rice Sector's involvement here. I want to give it back to Anika for her closing remarks, but maybe before that, very quickly, I didn't see Dr. Arif's hand, so maybe we can give him for his quick reaction, and then it's back to Anika for closing the session.
Thank you very much for this opportunity. And only 2 points I would like to make. One thing is that giving this GSP status to Pakistan, it may not be a philanthropic reason, or it may be a political reason from European Union. It may be a moral imperative as well, because I was just looking at this recent World Bank report about climate change and its impacts on Pakistan. So from 13 to 39 days, we are expecting in next 10 days, more hotter days, including for Pakistan more. So it means that these number of hotter days, it is bringing more drag on our GDP, and it's 1.2 billion to, I think, 3 to 4 billion that we are going to lose on annual basis if we do. Second thing is that I wish that Pakistan should not apply for GSP, and I wish that European Union should not give GSP status to Pakistan, because just look at that we have reasonable data that this GSP status did not deliver to Pakistan. Like, for example, that the business houses having deep pockets, that they kept on exporting under this GSP. Or even if European Union have to give this GSP, I still have to look at this 27 convention, but we need to ask Pakistan at least 3 conditions. One is that they should give 4% to education sector. Second, that they should drastically improve the quality of education. And third thing is that you need to put 26 million children out of school into the school. So we can't think about a different future for Pakistan, including trade. So while having 26 million children out of school. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Saab. And Anika, over to you to close the session, please.
Thank you so much. I think while we started off the discussion with whether FTAs and the GSP Plus is beneficial for Pakistan or not, I think the general impact has, or the general conversation has turned around to what are the measures that we have sort of lacked to take. I think, Zado, you mentioned the productivity. I think one reason why our labor or our workers are not productive is a lack of attention to technical education as well. So I think Pakistan needs to rethink and reevaluate the path that it has been on these entire years. We need to rethink and maybe revamp our policy on more evidence. We need it to be more evidence-based and anecdotal, which unfortunately has been in the past. Then I think that we also need to focus on, as a country, we said that instead of benefiting us, the special advantages given or provided have caused lack of competitiveness. And so Pakistan needs to move towards more competitive structures. That is also, and I think another key takeaway would be innovation, and also venturing into new industries and new options available. For example, right now, Sarah is not here, but she pointed out that textiles were still a major component in our GSP Plus. The way the world is now shifting, people do not prefer cotton-based products because cotton consumes a lot of water, and it's not entirely efficient with regards to climate change and everything. So another option that Pakistan, just quoting an example, could be perhaps banana fiber. So things of the sorts need to be explored. And if I'm forgetting something, Dr. Wakar, please feel free to add. Otherwise, I would like to thank the esteemed panelists. For everybody else, FNF always looks to be the impetus and the driver for initiating the conversation. And I'm happy that a small thought that our team had in March has turned out into a galvanized activity thanks to partners like Prime Institute and FNF, STPI. So thank you all for also showing interest. The room full and extra chair shows that there is an interest in such conversations, and hopefully we can continue bilateral conversations over lunch as well. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you, Anika, for this partnership. And of course, I would like to now invite our guests for lunch, which will then be followed by the 3 p.m. session. We'll be running 4 concurrent sessions. The first, which was discussed here around floods and local humanitarian effort. Second is around energy, food, and finance nexus. Third, on migration in South Asia, being led by the World Bank Group. And fourth is on literature, voices of female authors in literature from the subcontinent. I look forward to hosting you back at 3 p.m. Thank you.
If I could request 2 minutes of the panelists' time for a group photo. Standing.